The jungle went silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that comes right before death. 5 Japanese tanks crawled forward through the mud, steel monsters grinding trees into splinters. Their engines roared with confidence. Behind them, dozens of infantrymen advanced, certain this battle was already over. They believed the enemy line had collapsed. They believed no one was left alive. They were wrong. Hidden among shattered palm trees and burning wreckage was one wounded Allied soldier, alone, bleeding, and nearly out of ammunition. His rifle was useless, his radio destroyed, his unit either dead or captured. All he had left were 6 rounds and a pistol. What happened next would be written off as propaganda if the battlefield wasn't littered with 5 burning tanks an hour later. Japanese officers would later swear it was impossible. Engineers would say no single man could do this. Survivors would whisper his name like a ghost story. This is the true story of the soldier who proved them all wrong. The day the line broke. Pacific Theater, 1943. The rain never stopped in New Guinea. It soaked uniforms, rusted weapons, and turned foxholes into open graves. The jungle was thick enough to swallow sound. Light and sometimes entire patrols. This was not a place for heroics. It was a place where men vanished. Private First Class Daniel Mercer had been in the Pacific for 6 months. 6 months of rot, insects, and death. He was 24 years old, lean from hunger, eyes permanently narrowed against sweat and rain. He wasn't a war hero. He wasn't famous. He wasn't even supposed to be on the front line that morning. But war doesn't care about plans. The ambush. Mercer's unit, Charlie Company, had been ordered to hold a narrow jungle corridor. Intelligence claimed only light enemy movement. That intelligence was wrong. At dawn, the earth shook. Japanese artillery slammed into their position without warning. Trees exploded. Men screamed. The air filled with dirt and shrapnel. Then came the tanks. Type 95 Hago light tanks, small, fast, and deadly in jungle warfare, pushed through the foliage like predators. Charlie Company had no anti-tank guns, only rifles, grenades, courage. It wasn't enough. Within 15 minutes, the defensive line collapsed. Mercer watched a tank roll directly over a machine gun nest. Men crushed without a sound. Orders turned into shouting. Shouting turned into chaos. Then Mercer was thrown backward by an explosion. When he woke up, the world was quiet again. Too quiet. Alone. Smoke drifted through the trees. Mercer dragged himself upright, ears ringing. Blood ran down his temple. His rifle lay snapped in half nearby. No voices. No movement. Just burning wreckage and Japanese tanks idling ahead. Charlie Company was gone. Dead, scattered, or captured. Mercer checked his ammo. Rifle. Useless. Grenades, 2. Pistol, M1911. Ammo, 6 rounds. 6 rounds. Against 5 tanks. Most men would surrender. Some would run. Mercer did neither. Because he saw something the tanks didn't. The mistake the Japanese made. The Japanese column slowed. They believed the area was secure. Infantry spread out casually. Tank hatches opened slightly. Crews relaxed. They never searched the destroyed trench line. They never expected resistance. And they never noticed Mercer crawling into position. He studied the first tank carefully, not the armor. The terrain. Mud had clogged the left track. The tank struggled to turn. Mercer remembered something an engineer once told him during training. A tank doesn't need to be destroyed. Just stopped. He pulled the pin on his first grenade and smiled grimly how to stop a tank without destroying it. Mercer counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. The first Japanese tank sat barely 30 yards away. Its engine coughed and sputtered as the crew tried to free the mud-clogged track. Infantrymen laughed nearby, smoking cigarettes, convinced the fight was already over. Mercer pulled the grenade closer to his chest. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the ground. The first blast. The grenade rolled beneath the tank. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just enough. The explosion didn't flip the tank. It didn't tear it apart. Instead, it did something far worse. Mud, rocks, and metal fragments slammed into the already damaged track. The left side seized completely. The tank jerked forward once, and then died. Its engine screamed. The crew panicked. A tank that cannot move in the jungle is not a weapon. It is a coffin. Confusion. Japanese infantry scattered, unsure what had happened. They expected a platoon. They found nothing. Mercer stayed still. He waited. Seconds passed. Then a tank hatch cracked open. A head appeared. Mercer raised his pistol. One shot. The officer collapsed backward into the hatch. The hatch slammed shut. Mercer had 5 rounds left. The psychological weapon. The second grenade was more precious. He watched the other tanks reposition. Commanders shouted. Infantry formed a loose perimeter, but fear had already crept in. They had been told no enemy remained. Yet a tank was disabled, an officer was dead, and no enemy could be seen. Mercer crawled along the trench line like a ghost, using smoke and wreckage for cover. His wounded leg burned with every movement, but adrenaline drowned the pain. He chose his second target carefully, not the closest tank. The command tank. The second strike. Mercer waited until the command tank rotated its turret. Then he threw. The grenade bounced once, twice, and vanished beneath the rear. The blast ruptured the fuel line. Flames burst out like a scream. The tank did not explode. It burned. And burning tanks do something worse than explode. They terrify everyone who sees them. Panic. Japanese soldiers opened fire into the jungle. Bullets shredded leaves. Nothing fired back. Mercer had become a rumor. A shadow. A unit that didn't exist. 2 tanks were now out of action. Mercer checked his pistol again. 4 rounds left, and 3 tanks remained. A decision. He could retreat. Disappear into the jungle. Survive. But then he noticed something through the smoke. The tanks were bunching together. Close. Too close. They were afraid to move forward. Mercer realized the truth. They were no longer hunting him. They were afraid of him. And fear makes soldiers make mistakes. Mercer whispered to himself. Let's finish this 6 rounds against steel. Smoke wrapped the jungle like a living thing. 2 tanks burned. One sat crippled, its crew trapped inside. The remaining 3 machines stood close together, engines idling, turrets twitching left and right like nervous animals. The Japanese commander was shouting orders. Find him! Flush him out! He's alone. They were half right. Mercer was alone, but he wasn't helpless. The first mistake. A squad of infantry advanced toward the wrecked trench line, slow, cautious, rifles raised. Mercer watched them through a gap in the earth. He didn't shoot immediately. He waited for one thing. An officer. The man with the sword stepped forward, pointing, yelling. Mercer raised the pistol. Shot 2. The officer dropped. The squad froze. They didn't know where the shot came from. They fired wildly into shadows, into smoke, into fear. Mercer had 3 rounds left. Turning soldiers into a weapon. Mercer shifted positions again, crawling behind the disabled tank. The metal was still warm. Inside, the crew was screaming. Mercer didn't kill them. He didn't need to. Their screams echoed through the jungle, convincing everyone nearby that the tank was under constant attack. The remaining tanks backed up instinctively. One reversed too fast. Its rear struck a fallen tree stump. The track jumped. Metal snapped. The third tank was now immobile. No explosion, no grenade, just panic. The Japanese fire on their own. Now the fear took full control. Infantry believed the jungle was full of enemies. Tank gunners believed infantry were pointing targets. Someone fired, then everyone fired. Mercer watched. Japanese soldiers dived for cover as their own tank. Machine guns cut through the undergrowth. A squad disappeared in seconds. Mercer fired again. Shot 3. A tank periscope shattered. The gun turret spun blindly. The crew inside believed they were surrounded. They abandoned the tank. 3 tanks neutralized. Mercer had 2 rounds left. The final gamble. The last 2 tanks pulled apart, trying to cover each other. Mercer knew he couldn't outfight them, so he outthought them. He grabbed a Japanese helmet from the ground, filled it with mud and debris, and hurled it into the brush. Gunfire erupted instantly. While they fired at nothing, Mercer moved. He climbed onto the back of the nearest tank. The crew never checked the rear. Mercer leaned down, aimed into the open engine vent. Shot 4. The engine screamed, then died. Steam burst upward. The tank stopped. 1 remained. Mercer dropped to the ground hard. Pain exploded through his leg. He could barely stand. The final tank turned its turret toward him. Slow. Heavy. Unstoppable. Mercer raised his pistol. He had 1 round left, the last round. The final tank fired. The shell slammed into the ground where Mercer had been seconds earlier, throwing dirt and fire into the air. The blast knocked him flat, his ears ringing, his mouth filled with blood and soil. For a moment the world went dark. Then Mercer moved. Not because he was brave, because he refused to die face down in the mud. Nowhere left to run. The tank advanced slowly. Its turret searched. Its machine gun rattled, chewing trees apart. Mercer dragged himself behind a fallen log, chest heaving. His pistol felt heavy in his hand, too heavy for something that held only one bullet. One chance. No more tricks, no more grenades, just skill and timing. The weak point. Mercer remembered training manuals, things most soldiers forgot. Tanks are strongest where everyone shoots, weakest where no one looks. The commander's cupola. The viewing slit. Open, just a finger's width. The tank stopped. The turret turned. The commander leaned forward, trying to spot movement. Mercer steadied his breath. The jungle seemed to hold still. Bang! The last round flew. It slipped through the narrow slit like it had been guided. The commander collapsed inside the turret. The tank froze. The machine gun fell silent. Then nothing. 5 tanks. One trapped and crippled. One burned. One broken by panic. One disabled from the engine. One leaderless and abandoned. 5 tanks. Neutralized. By one man. With 6 rounds and a pistol. Aftermath. Japanese infantry did not advance. They didn't retreat at first either. They waited. Then someone shouted, "Pull back!" They withdrew into the jungle, dragging wounded men and leaving machines behind. They believed they had walked into a trap. They believed a battalion was hidden nearby. They never imagined the truth. When help arrived. Hours later, Allied scouts returned. They expected bodies. They found silence and 5 disabled tanks. Mercer was unconscious when they found him, slumped beside a log, pistol empty in his hand. One of the scouts whispered, "Jesus, what happened here?" No one answered, because no one could explain it. The man history almost forgot. The report no one believed. When Mercer woke up, he was in a field hospital. Morphine dulled the pain, but not the memories. An officer sat beside his bed with a notebook already open. "How many men were with you?" Mercer swallowed. "None, sir." The officer looked up. "How many tanks?" 5. The pencil stopped moving. The report went up the chain of command. Then it came back down, stamped with one word, unconfirmed. No one wanted to print a story that sounded like a fairy tale. 5 tanks, 1 man, a pistol, the official version. Officially, the report credited airstrikes and unknown anti-armor actions for disabling the Japanese armor. Mercer's name was barely mentioned. He received a silver star quietly, without ceremony. No newspaper photos, no interviews. The war had enough heroes already. What the Japanese said. Years later, captured Japanese records told a different story. They described invisible enemy fire, multiple concealed positions, at least a company-sized ambush. One officer wrote, "The jungle itself was fighting us. They never learned the truth." After the war, Mercer survived the Pacific. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. He never spoke about that day. When asked, he would say, "I just didn't want them reaching our guys behind us." That was all. No bragging, no stories. Why this story matters. Because war is not only fought by generals, not only by tanks, not only by numbers. Sometimes it is decided by one exhausted, wounded soldier who refuses to stop. 6 rounds, 1 pistol, and the will to stand when everything else has fallen. Outro, YouTube ready. They said it couldn't happen. They said one man couldn't stop 5 tanks. But on one forgotten day in the Pacific jungle, history learned how wrong they were. If you believe courage can change the course of a battle, like this video, subscribe for more real war stories. Because some heroes were never meant to be famous, only remembered. When legends start to grow, the story that changed shape. Back at headquarters, the battle report kept changing. First draft, enemy armor repelled by unknown resistance. Second draft, multiple Allied positions engaged enemy tanks. Third draft, Japanese withdrawal due to tactical reassessment. Each version moved farther from the truth, not because commanders were lying, but because the truth made no sense. One man did not stop 5 tanks. That was impossible. So the paperwork fixed it. The whispers among soldiers. But soldiers talk. And they talked a lot. Around campfires and foxholes, the story changed shape. He used a captured anti-tank rifle. He had help from jungle fighters. He was special forces. He wasn't even human. Someone nicknamed him the Jungle Ghost. Mercer never heard that name, but the Japanese did. The enemy's fear. Intercepted radio traffic later revealed something unusual. Japanese units approaching that sector requested extra reconnaissance, Artillery support. Daylight-only movement. For weeks their advance slowed. All because of one day. Fear had done what bullets couldn't. Mercer himself. Mercer didn't feel like a legend. He woke up at night sweating, not from explosions, but from silence. He remembered the screams from inside the tanks, the pounding on steel, the moment he realized they couldn't escape. War doesn't let you win for free, a question he never answered. A chaplain once asked him, "Do you regret it?" Mercer stared at the ground for a long time, then said, "If I hadn't done it, someone else would have paid the price." That was his answer. Nothing heroic, just honest. The battlefield years later. Long after the war, jungle reclaimed the place. Tanks rusted into the earth, vines wrapped around steel. Locals avoided the area. They said strange things happened there. Engines heard at night. Metal knocking. No one investigated, because no one needed to. The story was already finished. Why history kept it quiet? Big wars like clean numbers, divisions, battalions, air wings. They don't like exceptions. One man changing the course of a sector. That doesn't fit charts. So history whispered this story instead of shouting it. The legacy of one man. The war ends, but not for him. In 1945, the war finally ended. Cities celebrated. Flags filled the streets. Soldiers went home to applause. Mercer went home too. But the war never truly left him. Loud noises made him flinch. Silence felt heavier than gunfire. At night, his mind returned to the jungle. The smoke, steel, and screaming metal. The battle had ended. The memories had not. A quiet life. Many veterans returned as heroes. They wore medals. They told stories. They were celebrated. Mercer did none of that. He took a factory job, worked long shifts, kept to himself. When someone asked about the war, he answered with one sentence. "I was in the Pacific," and nothing more. The file that resurfaced. In the early 1960s, a military historian discovered an old, forgotten report. It was incomplete, contradictory, almost dismissed. But one line appeared again and again. 5 enemy tanks neutralized. Cause unknown. The historian dug deeper. Field photographs, after-action notes, witness statements. Slowly a name emerged. Mercer. Did it really happen? Was every detail exactly as remembered? Probably not. War distorts memory. Fear reshapes time. Legends grow, but the facts remained. 5 Japanese tanks were found disabled. No Allied armor or airstrikes were recorded. The enemy withdrew from the sector immediately. Something extraordinary had happened, and only one man was there. Mercer's final words. Mercer passed away in 1972. In his small room, his family found only 3 things. A faded service badge, an empty pistol magazine, a handwritten note. The note read, "I didn't do it to be remembered. I did it so others wouldn't have to." The modern legacy. How history remembers heroes. Decades passed. Wars ended. Generals wrote books. Soldiers returned to quiet lives. But Mercer's story lingered in whispers. Military historians pieced it together. Reports, photographs, survivor statements. Documentaries mentioned one man against impossible odds. Yet the world never fully knew his name. Not until now. Lessons from one man. Mercer didn't fight for fame. He didn't fight for medals. He fought to protect others. One man, 6 bullets, 5 tanks. A reminder that courage is not measured by armies, but by choices made in the worst possible moments. And sometimes, the smallest actions leave the largest marks. The emotional impact. Imagine standing alone, facing unstoppable machines, fear crushing every thought. Knowing failure means death, not just for you, but for everyone behind you. Mercer acted. Not because he wanted glory, not because it was easy, because someone had to, and that is what makes a hero unforgettable. 5 tanks, 1 soldier, 6 bullets. History almost forgot him. But courage doesn't need an audience. If you believe bravery can change the course of history, like this video, subscribe for more incredible true war stories. Modern connection. Today, young soldiers, historians, and enthusiasts watch this story and ask, could I do what he did? How does one person hold back an army? What would I do in that moment? The story doesn't answer those questions. It inspires them. Mercer's legacy is not just a tale of war, it is a story of resilience, intelligence, and courage under impossible pressure.